Well, friends, my watch just struck 1 o'clock. Do you want to go ahead and get started officially?
Sure.
Yep.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast, and good morning if you're on the West Coast or somewhere in between. Thanks for being here for today's webinar, Ratings, Overhead, and Measuring Impact, How to Use Your Social Sector Excellence to Attract and Retain Donors. And my name is Stephen Shattuck, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Bloomerang, and I'll be moderating today's discussion as always. And before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this presentation and we'll be sending out the recording as well as the slides later on this afternoon. So if you have to leave early or perhaps you want to review the content later on or share it with a friend or colleague, you'll be able to do that. Just look for an email from me later on this afternoon. And as you're listening today, please feel free and feel welcome to send any questions or comments our way using the chat box right there on the screen. We're going to save some time at the end for Q&A, and we'd like for that to be as interactive as possible. So don't be shy. Send any questions our way, and we're going to try to answer just as many as we can before the 2 o'clock Eastern hour. And please, if you're a Twitter kind of person, if you'd like to follow along on Twitter, please send us a message using the hashtag Bloomerang, or talk to us directly using Bloomerang Tech. That's our username. And if you're listening today via your computer, if you have any trouble at all during the course of the hour, dial in by phone. Usually it's a little bit better audio quality if you use your phone if you can. So just check your email from ReadyTalk. It'll have a phone number in there if you want to go ahead and make that switch. And just in case this is your first webinar with us, welcome. We're so glad you're here. We do these webinars just about every Thursday. But if you're not familiar with Bloomerang, we offer a donor management software application. So if you're in the market for that or if you're interested in learning more, we'd love for you to visit our website. You can even download a quick video demo. You don't even have to talk to a salesperson if you don't want to. So check us out. We'd love to get to know you beyond just this hour-long presentation. So I want to go ahead and introduce today's guests. We have Barbara O'Reilly and Richard Neustedter on the line today. Hey there, friends. How's it going?
It's great. Thank you.
Well, I'm excited to have you both here. This is obviously a timely presentation. Even though we've had this scheduled for a while, there was obviously some news in the sector concerning overhead, so I'm really excited to have you both talk about this interesting topic that I know a lot of people have perhaps some strong opinions on. So I took a peek at your slides, and I'm really excited for the information you're going to share. But before I turn it over to you, I just want to introduce you and tell the folks a little bit more about both of you. If you don't know Barbara, Barbara O'Reilly has more than 20 years of fundraising experience at some major nonprofit organizations, ones you've probably heard of, including Harvard University, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Oxford University, and the American Red Cross. She has experience developing, her specialty is kind of relationships between donors and nonprofits through annual funds, capital campaigns, major gifts, specifically from high net worth individuals, and corporations, direct mail, and stewardship. And I actually got to hang out with Barbara just earlier this last week on Monday, so it's a real treat to have you on the line. And her partner in crime today is Richard Neustedter. He's got over 25 years of progressive marketing management experience. He is over at Nonprofit Financial Specialists. And throughout his career, he has effectively analyzed budgets, forecasted finances, and led successful product marketing teams as his work as an executive in the highly competitive Silicon Valley semiconductor industry. So we've got kind of both sides of the table here. We've got the fundraising and sort of the finance and biz ops perspective. So Barbara and Richard, I'm super excited. I'm going to pipe down, and I'll let you two take it away for us.
That's great. Thanks, Stephen.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Richard and I are really delighted to be with you today to talk about a very important topic, how to navigate through the web of ratings and overhead to instead highlight best practices that attract and retain donors. We'd like to start by giving you the context of what donors today look for when making their giving decisions. Then we'll talk about what it means for an organization to demonstrate what we're calling social sector excellence by having strong business practices across the organization which tie closely to financial management that has been the focus of so much of this debate. And then finally, we'll circle back to how to reframe conversations with donors given what we know is a very strong sensitivity to ROI of their gifts. And then, of course, as Stephen mentioned, we'd like to leave time at the end for questions. So I'd like to start with a very sobering thought that Bob Ottenhoff, who's former CEO of GuideStar, once said. He said, the age of assumed virtue is gone, meaning that donors no longer primarily rely on the good reputation of organizations to make their giving decisions. This is, of course, with the exception of sudden onset emergencies or disasters, which inspire sort of impulsive, in-the-moment giving. But the reality is that donors don't just give nowadays because you ask. And evidence that donor giving is not always guided by this blind trust can be seen in recent surveys. In the Chronicle Philanthropy poll that was released in 2015, late 2015 in fact, survey participants were asked how much confidence they have in charitable organizations, and 47% of them said they had a fair amount, quote, fair amount of confidence. As we'll see though, this confidence is tied to the key issues of finance and performance. The problem is though that these numbers have stayed stuck at 47% in each of the 4 polls that the Chronicle has done since 2003. This was also seen as a top concern in the Money for Good report that was released also last fall. 49% of poll participants were concerned and interested in knowing how the organization uses their money. So building trust is tied to demonstrating strong social sector excellence, and there are tactics and tools that can help you bridge this gap. So access to information like never before and the intense competition for donor dollars has created a new landscape of philanthropy. Research shows that donors are looking for ROI, organizations that are effective and sustainable as their sort of philanthropic investments. So what does this mean? This means that the nonprofits are demonstrating high performance in 4 key areas: leadership, operational results, attentive measurement of impact of mission, and using results to constantly improve trust. But self-promotion is not the only requirement to building that donor trust. You must also be validated by others. So how do donors find the best investments of their gifts in the sea of more than 1 million nonprofits in the U.S.? GuideStar was founded in the mid to late 1990s as a resource for grant makers to conduct due diligence. And at the time, digitizing the 990s, which was what they started doing, was really revolutionary. Charity Navigator came along in 2001 in response to the scandals being reported at the local and national charities about mismanagement. And Charity Navigator wanted to be that source for the, quote, social investors, or as we know them, donors, to make decisions. So these charity watchdogs or validators like Charity Navigator and now Better Business Bureau's Wise Giving Alliance have created a scorecard to help donors make their decisions. These ratings, though, are limited in the scope of measurement, based primarily off of the 990, and are only one part of the story and really often misrepresent the real impact of an organization. So there's a lot of misunderstandings, both by donors and nonprofits, how the financials are analyzed, causing everyone to lose sight of the bigger picture of nonprofit health, performance, and sustainability. Donors are left with limited and sometimes misrepresentations of nonprofits, and the organizations themselves feel pressure to conform to standards that they feel the validators are setting, and the conversation gets stuck on a narrow definition of impact. So today, Richard and I are here to dispel the myth that it's all about the star ratings of Charity Navigator or the BBB Wise Giving stamp of approval. Those are certainly one measure of a bigger picture of a nonprofit's financial health and operational performance. GuideStar is now serving as a thought leader by trying to balance the conversation to focus on impact. So we'll talk today about how to tie the two together. But really, the only way a nonprofit can attract and retain donors is by having a clear vision and plan, a culture of high performance that's imbued and embraced by the entire organization, and a strong intention of measuring progress and course correcting when necessary. Ultimately, the overall health of an organization demonstrated through these 3 areas will nearly always create strong programs with results, and that's what donors want. So let's look at what influences the social investment decisions for donors. Donors, in particular major ones, are looking at program performance and financial management very, very closely, and that much is clear. When asked about factors that influence their giving in this Chronicle Philanthropy poll that I referenced just a few minutes ago, Nearly 70% of them, the biggest portion of the survey respondents, said it's very important that the charity has evidence that its programs are effective. The other factors, at sort of 50 to 55%, favored low overhead spending and were concerned about having good charity ratings by these watchdogs. But clearly the donors and the nonprofits themselves are not able to connect program and administrative costs as integral to the full context of organizational effectiveness. So watchdog groups, or validators is a better term, have defined a methodology which can be used as a model for performance. These benchmarks compare results using a standard framework, and the metrics themselves are judged and rated as good or excellent ratings, and they seem to identify and reward what are now considered best practices. The validators themselves didn't intend to drive this shift in best practices, but that's the result. The problem is that no validators have really defined holistically what a best practice is, and they further don't assist a charity to achieve those best practices as they're defining them. They don't provide guidance in advance of the ratings, and they just simply provide a scorecard after the fact. So in many cases, the information that's being used for the rating is 1 to 2 years old and is almost irrelevant to the current operating conditions. And so the result is fear and confusion. So increased scrutiny over finances leads nonprofits to do what they can to appear, quote, lean and mean. You know, in a study that was done in 2004 by the Urban Institute Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy, and in conjunction with the Center on Philanthropy at Indiana University, researchers examined the tax forms of nearly over 200,000 nonprofits, and they wanted to determine what the accuracy was of the financial reporting. And what they found was just widespread discrepancies, as they cited, quote, that defies plausibility. You see here a few of the stats. 37%, nearly 40% of the organizations reported having no fundraising costs. 13% said they had no management and general expenses. And these findings were consistent in a Bridgespan study that was done several years later that showed a very marked range, wide range of ratings, overhead rating percentages. So then that leads us to the question. We hear so many times that organizations are touting 90 to or even 100% of their donor dollars are going to programs. And can this really be the case? And the answer is yes and no. It completely depends on how much unrestricted funding the organization is able to raise to offset those programmatic costs, or if the organization is successfully able to incorporate the full cost into their major gift asks. And so the result is that the charities have such a fear of disapproval that pressures them to cater to the public prejudices, like lowering overhead, keeping salaries down, having low investment in fundraising and marketing expenditures. And the more the charities lower these costs, the less they're able to educate the public about the great work they're doing, the less able they are to hire and retain the number and the quality of the staff that they need, and also to ensure the operational infrastructure to support their programs. The nonprofit itself may not also have the cash reserves to protect against risks, and certainly won't have the available bandwidth to be able to respond to opportunities in a strategic way that moves their mission forward. So when the full cost of a nonprofit's program is not met, ultimately the communities are paying the price because you've got compromised effectiveness, which is in fact the exact opposite of what we believe to be the main driver of donor intention. And then donor expectations are not met, leading to the broken trust we mentioned earlier, and so the cycle continues. But there's a better way to meet donor demands and build trust into your organization beyond financial reporting. We know that organizations that can invest in their entire operations ultimately are more likely to succeed than those that don't. And so the challenge remains, how can we educate donors about the connection between best practices through financial management, strategic direction, and staff to strong program performance and a sustainable organization? Using social sector excellence to build trust, attract, and retain donors is a critical strategy for success, and it starts with board governance. And so ratings are just one part of the story.
Thanks to Barbara. I would like to take over now and give a little bit better explanation of what we consider social sector excellence, defining what this really means to you as an individual organization. The concept that we're introducing here, again, is a strategy that can be used to attract and retain donors. These concepts can be a bit overwhelming if you look at them as individual actions for your organization. So we're trying to break them down into achievable activities as we continue with this presentation. So first, let's define what this means. It's important to note that we are not reinventing the wheel here. Instead, we are employing proven practices from thought leaders to enhance the success of the nonprofit sector. High performance, or social sector excellence, uses the 7 components of highly successful people as a guide for building a successful organization. For nonprofits, there are 4 main opportunities. Leadership, people with passion and experience that have strategic vision and a creative means to get there, combined with operational results, high performance and financial health, exhibiting capability and sustainability for the organization, measuring the effect of your mission, the evaluation for impact, both internal as well as validation through external sources, and providing evidence of your success. And then lastly, monitoring yourself for the improvements necessary through internal assessment, which will then be used to drive strategic changes. We feel that this performance imperative can result in a high impact organization exhibiting social sector excellence. You may ask, why do we want to do this? Well, the reason is that validators are driving the need for excellence by providing donors with a scorecard for charities. Many organizations think that these methodologies are subjective and mysterious. In fact, they're rather simple calculations or assessments based mostly on public information reported on the 990 or information from your website. Let's take a look at the specific metrics being used to get a better understanding of the tactics and tools needed to meet these evolving donor demands. First, we have accountability and transparency. These are more than buzzwords. They reflect significant components of your operation which you need to disclose to the public or community trust that you serve. They start with governance, oversight, and a dedication to the ethical practices of highly successful organizations. The purpose of this is to establish a culture of accountability defined by structural policies and procedures, which are enabling tactics to build trust. Once you've implemented these best practices, you need to communicate the fact to the public. Nonprofits are, after all, public trusts, and therefore responsible and accountable to the general community. Full disclosure of operational conditions is part of the trust-generating action. Now let's look at how validators use this information to rate or score your organization. In my experience, there are 2 main validating organizations, most recognized by donors for performance information. They are, as referred earlier, Charity Navigator and the Better Business Bureau's Wise Giving Alliance through their Charity Seal program. Charity Navigator rates national organizations with a 0 to 4-star system, which is simple for donors, and they like and enjoy the opportunity to quickly look and assess an organization's capabilities. They do restrict their assessments to organizations with operating revenue of $1 million or more. Currently, they rate about 6,000 charities with plans to increase to 10,000. This may seem a small number within the overall 1.4 million charities in the U.S. However, Charity Navigator reports that 50% of the giving goes to the charities they rate. Therefore, this makes them a significant player in donor decisions. The Better Business Bureau provides accreditation by application to their Charity Seal program. There's no cost to apply and obtain accreditation. The application process takes time and requires in-depth operational information. However, meeting the 20 standards identifies to a donor that you have implemented best practices for social sector excellence, establishing trust. Use of the BBB logo itself does require an annual fee, which is typically scaled based upon revenue of the organization. These different validators can be used, they use many of the same inputs so that it becomes easier for you to manage the data across both organizations. Let's review these validating sources in more detail. Charity Navigator uses inputs from the 990 and a nonprofit's website to determine financial ratings, and a governance rating identified as accountability and transparency. They use 7 metrics for financials and 20 metrics for governance, which create a combined score representing the overall performance of the organization. You don't need to actually be excellent in all categories to get an excellent rating. But the key is to understand how the rating is defined, and more importantly, what you can do to manage it before you report results on the 990. Ideally, an organization should determine an estimated rating with the annual budget. The key is to understand these rating components by mapping them to your reporting information and translating them from your operational plan. There are tools to help you do this. Now let's look at the BBB accreditation. The Wise Giving Alliance established 20 standards or metrics for charity accountability and performance. The Charity Seal program requires an application with information which supports these standards, many of which are the same as those metrics used by Charity Navigator. The Charity Seal program incorporates financial metrics as well as detailed operational practices identified to confirm that an organization operates using best practices for high performance. The Better Business Bureau's logo is a nationally recognized validation source. If you compare the information used by BBB accreditation to the Charity Navigator metrics, you'll see that many of them are the same. Because of this, you can more easily identify operational methods to implement which will positively impact performance measured by either source. Now let's look at opportunities to tell your story as part of building trust through external validation. Testimonials and self-reporting of mission success are the ways that a charity can provide external validation of impact and operational performance. As Barbara alluded to earlier, GuideStar Exchange is one method for doing this. They provide the ability to have online profiles of information that you manage. They categorize them in 3 areas of bronze, silver, and gold. And the good news is their database links to 60-plus websites, applications, and programs which support nonprofits. Another source is Great Nonprofits. They provide the opportunity for you to manage testimonials and stories about your mission and impact. They link to over a dozen other outlets and, very importantly, feed information into GuideStar for the gold level of the exchange program. Both organizations push data to other sites, helping to expand your reach and educate donors about your success. They help you tell your story through external validation. So the real question is, why spend time supporting these activities defined as social sector excellence? Because successful charities can use this information provided by validators as a promotional tool to establish trust and confidence in your organization. Managing your public image with validation is a powerful tool which can attract and retain donors. Remember, data plus validation can be used to build trust. And furthermore, many advisory organizations are using validation sources as a means to guide donor decisions. This is especially important in large donor consideration. So social sector excellence, confirmed by ratings, is an important strategic tool to help achieve your mission year after year. These important organizational conditions are tickets to the dance, so to speak, in today's competitive environment. Establishing trust is mandatory in attracting and maintaining donors. Now, let's look at how you can use this information to increase donor support. I'll turn this over to Barbara.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So we started our presentation by saying that there's been a breakdown in trust between donors and nonprofits. Increased access to information by donors and a few bad stories of mismanagement of funds over the years, and especially most recently, have led to more questions being asked. This isn't a bad thing. It's just that donors are asking the questions in the wrong way, putting the nonprofits in the defensive stance instead of allowing them to be in a space in which they can create stories of transparency, impact, and dreams. So we all know that good fundraising is not transactional anymore. It used to work, but today's donors expect more out of their relationships with charities they support. And they also have more resources to do their homework about the organizations they are interested in supporting over the long term. So how organizations treat and interact with their donors has to change in order to continue to attract and retain them. Conversations, and this applies to both general annual donors, but especially for major ones, should include 3 important factors that donors use to measure if you're a good philanthropic investment: results, fiscal responsibility, and vision. By building these into your storytelling, you will help move the focus beyond how much do you spend on overhead to what do good outcomes cost. And remember, donors want ROI, and they're giving not because of your needs. They're giving because they share your vision for a solution, for results to an issue that's important to you and to them. I won't go into specifics today about donor-centered fundraising, but rather I'd like to suggest some key information that can help shape your messaging, whether illustrated through mass mailings, profiling beneficiaries, or built into your major donor solicitation, or just general donor communications that you produce. So if we think about the key ingredients that define social sector excellence that Richard just shared a few minutes ago, your fundraising case and messaging should always start with your vision. What is it that your organization is hoping to accomplish? What and how are you planning to get there? What's your culture of performance? What is it about you as an organization that makes you unique and best positioned to address the goals and the vision that you've stated in your strategic plan? And finally, how will you know if you are making progress? What sort of metrics do you put in place to monitor whether or not you're on track? And being honest and open about failures and learning from how to course correct is as important as celebrating successes. Donors really want to hear that you are being thoughtful and intentional in your program design. And in reality, these are all key elements of a strategic plan. The plan should not be just a piece of paper that you create once every few years and stick in a drawer. It should be the operational driver, the tactics, the vision, the strategy that help to guide your organization toward a new reality of program results. So I mentioned earlier that donors and nonprofits have a hard time connecting operational expenses with program effectiveness. They sort of think of them as 2 different buckets. But if you've created your story around plans and program designs and metrics, then the cost for infrastructure and operational needs now become framed around bigger goals and the investments needed to achieve them. And you have now a better way to measure performance than just program ratios. So your conversations become about costs to achieve outcomes and how investments in you as an organization as a whole can now be much more meaningful. So rebuilding and retaining your donor trust can include a few key points in your conversations. First, know what your full costs are. What is it that you need as an organization to keep your doors open? What risks could you anticipate, especially in changing landscapes and in changing environments and economies? And how much would you need to address those risks? Are there other opportunities that, if money were not an issue, that you could implement and incorporate into your programs that can help you do your work more effectively? And then when you're asking for program support, and this is especially the case for major gift asks, always build in the full cost, because it does no one any good if you're just asking for program support when the organizational expenses are not in place to be able to run those programs. Also, stop talking about how much every donor dollar goes towards your programs, but instead position your overhead in the context of how you need to thrive as an organization. What are the full operational needs that you have to help focus on and keep your results in sight? And lastly, always focus on your impact and your results, and celebrate the donors who are investing in you and for their help in achieving the results.
So I'd like to take the opportunity now to summarize the information that we've presented. We really feel strongly that social sector excellence is a strategy that you can employ to ensure sustainable results by attracting and retaining donors to your cause. The graphic provides a visual representation of the components that lead to a stronger nonprofit organization and market sector. Validators are just one part of an effort to create a standard framework for best practices for nonprofits. The point is that donors want the best possible return on their philanthropic investment, and they look for financial stability and sustainability, impact and results, and finally, sound leadership and strategic vision to demonstrate that. These are 3 areas of sector excellence that you need to have in place. And if they are, your donors will no longer focus on how much overhead you charge, but rather will understand the investment in organizational capacity needed to run effective and impactful programs. The challenge for all nonprofits is to understand how donors use public information to guide their decisions, so you can establish strategic plans which manage information and meet your donor expectations. I want to thank Barbara for the presentation here today and her insights on the fundraising side.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for your expertise as well in helping to break down the myths and the confusion around all of the validators. Stephen, I think we can probably open up for some questions.
Yeah, I'd love to, and I just want to say thank you to both of you for the rundown on what's going on and kind of demystifying the sort of sector here, and we kind of purposely kept this a little bit shorter because I know that there are some interesting and strong opinions about the whole topic, and we wanted to open it up for kind of an interactive discussion. And I have a bunch of questions that I was writing down, and we've already gotten a lot come in already. So I just want to invite people to send those questions our way. We're going to spend probably about the next 20 minutes or so doing that. And I'm going to ask my own question first, if you all allow me to be a little bit selfish. You know, we try to do a webinar about once a year on the whole overhead and charity ratings thing. And whenever I announce that webinar, I always get some strongly worded emails, and I'm sure I'll get some after this presentation by people who attended or maybe saw that we were doing it. And those are fundraisers who are firmly entrenched in the belief that none of these organizations are valid. This is all a terrible way to sort of judge nonprofits, and I'm just curious what your take, Barbara and Richard, is on, what would you say to that fundraiser who thinks that, none of this should even be looked at and it's totally invalid? I'm curious if maybe you've ever had that experience of someone expressing that opinion to you.
I'll start, and then I know Richard has some thoughts as well. So I am, in fact, am a recovering fundraiser in that regard. So when Richard and I first met a couple of years ago, I was definitely in that camp where I felt that the putting this lens on nonprofits in such a way really lost sight of the bigger picture of what nonprofits were hoping to achieve. But it's been in talking with Richard and getting to know a little bit more, hearing from his expertise, that the reality is that I have a sort of a more balanced perception now, and the reality is that these validators aren't going away.
Right.
That there are donors who are looking to them for some sort of guidance. I mean, how many times do any of us on the phone go to Yelp or go to TripAdvisor when we're looking for ratings on a restaurant or a hotel? So it's the same for the nonprofit sector, and I think it just provides one more sort of benchmark, one more sort of perspective on that uses, in fact, very concrete evidence, concrete information from the 990s. And then also where GuideStar and great nonprofits have come in is to try to balance that by letting the nonprofits speak and celebrate and demonstrate the programmatic results, the impact, the other areas, the strategic vision, the things that will present a more holistic view of their organization. So, I mean, I think it's a matter of, not dismissing them because they are here to stay, and it's a matter of just understanding that they are serving the best intentions for donors to be thoughtful in what's the best use of their donor dollars.
Yeah, I'm going to actually take a slightly different approach to this because I look at this as a strategic opportunity that is often not incorporated into the operating plan of the organization. Mm-hmm. I completely agree with what Barbara has said. This is a donor-centric view that these watchdogs or validators come from, and I think that it's important from a governance perspective that we understand that as a governance agency or as a board of directors, your responsibility is to provide for the organization all of the tools necessary to be successful. And I would put forth the idea or the argument that one of those tools is external validation and a rating which meets certain donor expectations. I'm not saying that an organization can't be successful without them. I know that there are people who won't give to you if you don't have this in place. And as a governance advisor, my position is that a tool to enable every campaign to be successful requires this to make sure that you can attract every donor. So it really is an enabling tool set that I look at this as being part of. It's a way to empower the staff to be successful with every single ask that they have. And so it really goes up to the governance level.
I agree with both of you, and I used to have maybe a little bit stronger opinions, similar to what Barbara maybe went through herself. And my wife's a fundraiser; she's a career fundraiser. She's almost 10 years into the sector, and I think that she should be compensated well and fairly. So I always sort of stray away from those kinds of things as a good rating. But I completely agree that these people aren't going to go away, and it's not as if they're predatory either. They're not going out and rating people lowly with impunity necessarily. So I completely agree. And Richard, one thing you just said that really stood out to me is, the donors that do care about these kinds of ratings, who are they? Are those major gift prospects? Are they your current loyal donors? Are they people who have not donated to you before but are maybe researching you, for lack of a better term? Who are those people? Is it a combination of all those things?
Well, I can give you a little bit of anecdotal evidence. I actually met with a client of mine last week who is doing a major gift campaign for their endowment. They're spending a lot of money. They've hired a consultant for this, so this is a big campaign, a big dollar campaign. He had the opportunity to meet with the head of Fidelity's donor advised funds. They use Charity Navigator's ratings as one of their qualifications, actually as their primary qualifier for approving a charity as a receiver of funds through their organized giving with their clients. So, when you have major organizations like that who have already established this as the check box that says a charity is qualified to receive funds. I personally do a fundraising campaign for a small nonprofit and have a very good friend of mine, and that's where their money is. And so I had the questionnaire from Fidelity that I had to fill out first in order to get qualified to receive. And in this case, it was a very small donation, under $100. So it just shows you the breadth of involvement that Charity Navigator can have in the giving spectrum. I mean, it's at the very, very top, and it can be at a very small level. And again, we need to attract all of those donations.
Makes sense. Well, we've got a comment here from Doug and a question, and thanks to all of you who have sent questions in already. Keep them coming because we have probably about 15 minutes or so for those, and I'll try to get to all of them. But Doug just kind of echoed what you just said, Richard. He says, although we'd all agree that the most important aspect of our work is impact, it seems like these charity watchdogs are kind of a necessary first step. Would you agree with that statement? Do you think that they are indeed maybe some people call them a necessary evil? Doug says a first step. And Doug was also wondering, does one of the agencies sort of trump another? Is there one that people should focus on, or maybe spend the most time sort of leveraging or trying to get that rating? Or should they try to get all three? Would you prioritize them all evenly? I'm curious what you guys think there.
Actually, I would take a step back and say that if you put your operational organization in order, you don't have to worry about it. You can put your focus back into telling your story. Now I know that that's a grand scheme and often easier said than done, but that's the perspective. Again, it goes back to an organizational structure. Now, if you want to focus on an individual rating organization, I would actually focus on the very simple calculation, the methodology that Charity Navigator uses, because it's easier, it is directly translatable from the 990, and it is far more manageable from your operating budget than some of the others. They require more information. Charity Navigators is very specific to the 990. The challenge is to map out exactly what those components of the 990 are and then drive your business to those results. So I have some tools which are fairly simple in defining that, and that has been the challenge, I think, in the marketplace, is there are no tools available for organizations to very simply do this. So the answer is yes, it is a step. I think it is a first step, but it comes from your management activities, and so that you don't have to spend a bunch of time and resources doing it over and over and over. It should become just a structural component of your budgeting activity.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Well, Catherine has a question that I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, and it's one that I actually wrote down myself as I was listening. Let's say that you do have a rating, and maybe it's unfavorable, or you think perhaps it's incorrect, or maybe they missed a certain aspect of what you're doing, or it was fair at the time, and you've since turned things around or made some changes. Can you go about, cleaning up those profiles? Is there a way to get them to rate you again? How can you kind of mitigate perhaps a negative, negative public relations type situation or something like that, where you feel the rating is causing you a little bit of harm?
Well, that's a good question, and I've actually had this direct experience. I've created a tool which mimics Charity Navigator's rating so that I can do an advanced rating based upon your budget and your 990 way before Charity Navigator ever gets it. Charity Navigator's information, as I said, is at least a year old because of the filing delays in information, and often it's 2 years old. They will not accept a revised 990. So if you catch an error after you filed and it resulted in a negative rating, you're stuck with that until the next filing, not a revision for 990. Very important to note. On that front, I would recommend that you revise your 990 and post it to your website so that you actually can correct the error with your own publicly available data. And you can use that then to tell a story. You can use it as a campaign, a communication vehicle. There was an error. You should use that opportunity to self-promote the error, but you're not going to get it done through Charity Navigator. So I really think that the opportunity exists to not depend upon Charity Navigator or these other organizations to tell the proper story for you, but to find the tools so that you can mimic the information that they're reporting. You can tell it yourself and use that proactively way before they ever actually rate you. So, and by the way, they do make errors. I have found, because I've done this analysis with clients of mine, I have found in 2 cases where they made an error, a simple calculation error, which did result in a lower rating. Now, I will give them credit. The minute the error was identified to them, they had it fixed within a day or 2. So they're very responsive to that, but they are human and they're not infallible. So.
Well, there's a question here. I'm going to scan over to it. I want to make sure I read it exactly. I love this question because it's something that I kind of have some strong opinions on as well. Donors who really care, donors who care about overhead costs, who care about operational costs. If you have a donor who says, I'm not going to give to an organization who has more than 15% operational costs or 15% overhead, should you care? I guess is the simple question. Do you think that you should try to bend over backwards and maybe explain yourself to that donor, or not even worry about how they perceive your overhead and your operational costs? What would you say to an organization who kind of wrestles with that? And it's not necessarily with a ton of their donors, but maybe they have 1 or 2 that have really strong opinions. What advice would you give to that organization dealing with that kind of donor?
So, I mean, of course, I don't want to sound dismissive, but it depends on sort of, what if the donor is, a $10 donor,
Right.
and they're complaining about 15% overhead. I'm not sure that that's the best use of staff time to explain that. But in all of your messaging to all of your donors, really, I mean, it should be focused on. It's empowering for the nonprofit to take that conversation and shift it so that it's not just it isn't just 15% of overhead. It's, well, let me explain to you what goes into our overhead, and if we don't have enough staff in our finances, we can't run reports and manage our program expenses in the most cost-efficient way. If we don't have enough fundraisers on staff, we can't continue to grow our revenue base to be able to expand and grow and deepen our impact and achieve more results as a result because of this. I mean, it's breaking it down to explain that there's a broader capacity investment that needs to happen that support and elevate and strengthen the programs themselves. I've certainly worked with donors who get stuck on that sort of cost per beneficiary ratio, and when you can frame it, when you can position the ask or position the conversation in a way that gives them that fuller picture of everything that your organization needs to better serve your clients or your beneficiaries, then you can sort of take that off the table.
Makes sense.
Yes, I do agree, and I want to add a little guiding statement that I learned in my semiconductor experience. The chairman of the board for the company I worked for had a great phrase that we lived by, which was very simple: good news is no news is bad news, and bad news is good news. And that directly relates to what Barbara said. You take that bad news, you analyze it and understand what it is, and you reframe your ask to donors. Now, in the same context, you may determine that that individual is actually not one that you're ever going to convince, that they have already come up to the conclusion that they're not going to give to you, but you have used that information as a phenomenal learning opportunity so that you're already positioned for other donors who, in fact, will give you the opportunity to improve the bad news into good news.
Love it. Well, here's a question from Jim, and a couple other folks have asked this as well. Curious if you two have observed a certain type of nonprofit, such as like a social service or healthcare or maybe education. Is there a certain type of nonprofit that is maybe more heavily scrutinized, rightly or wrongly, versus another type of niche or mission focus? Education, religious, healthcare. Is there one that has to kind of worry about this more than others, perhaps, or maybe is there a size criteria, not just the niche that they work in?
I would say that there isn't specifically. I think no, I don't see that at all. I think that what you will have is you will have organizations related to a bad news story go under temporary scrutiny. And that's the bigger risk, is that you may think everything's fine for you, and then an affiliated charity, for instance, Wounded Warrior Project, all organizations now involved in veteran support are going to be scrutinized a little bit more as a result of this bad story.
Right.
And that's more what I think the situation is relative to the public image. And it goes right back to what we started with. The age of assumed virtue is gone. You get a story of bad behavior, and then now everybody is somewhat punished as a result of that.
Yeah, it seems like, maybe once a year something like this comes about. It was kind of, it's Wounded Warriors, obviously, last month, and that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier on in the presentation. Is that do you see a typical kind of news cycle? Do you think that this perception is always going to repeat and that we just kind of have to deal with it, or do you think we'll will ever sort of overcome that sort of scrutiny from like the media and the press, because there's these groups that you talked about today, and then there's also just the general public, right? And I'm wondering if you can speak to that sort of general public awareness. Is it different? Should we treat them any different from the other sort of watchdog groups? Or what can we do about that sort of negative perception that seems to get a light shined on it, maybe once a year in that short news cycle?
Well, I think that, again, putting in the structural components so that you've already met the donor expectations is the first step. I think it's a strategic action that you should take so that when this type of information comes out, and it's not if, it's when, right? We love bad stories in this country. We have lots of outlets for media, and you can anticipate that the opportunity for these stories is only going to be increasing. I don't think it's going to be decreasing. We love all this information. The question is, are you positioned to weather whatever storm may be out there tomorrow? Certainly the larger organizations who are more visible are a better target. So, but you don't want to, I do have some clients who have not the best performance in certain areas, but they haven't been reviewed in their mind, right? So therefore they think that they're possibly going to fly below the radar. And my position is at a risk that you want to assume. It's a risk analysis and assessment, right? The point is, what if you do get looked at? How defensible is your position, or how recoverable is the bad media to your organization? And then in a lot of cases, in my experience, it's irrecoverable. I mean, I don't know that Wounded Warrior Project is going to recover from this bad press, right? It goes back to
there a place?
Never put your organization in that position of risk.
And then from the fundraising perspective, when those stories happen, when there's a particularly negative light that might be shown upon your organization, that's not the time to retreat from your donor communications. That's, in fact, the time when you are proactive, not defensive, but proactively engaging in conversations with your donors to explain to them the fuller context. And that's critical, because you want to make sure, we talked a little bit about retention, donor retention, and this is not the conversation to bemoan the abysmal retention rates, but the fact is that if so much of our effort needs to be on keeping the donors that we have, you need to make sure that your communications plans will allow for you to be quickly responsive to those situations in a way that offers constructive analysis of what has happened, and not in a defensive way, because you want to be able to promote the good work you're doing and the overall operational effectiveness that you're striving to achieve.
Let's say you're an organization who they followed your advice, Barbara and Richard, that you give today. You've got your governance set, you got your culture, everyone's on board, you're communicating it. Do you think there's an opportunity to sort of be opportunistic with that negative news cycle and say something about it and kind of be proud of the fact that you have all that together? Or should you not even put that into your donors' minds? I hear a lot of consultants who say, the less you can have your donor thinking about operational costs, the better. Even if your operational costs are low or you think they're fine and you have all these things in place, do you think that total transparency is a good thing to have, or do you think you should just be reactive should someone, raise a flag or scrutinize you in some way? What's kind of your feeling there?
Well, you never want to get yourself backed into a corner. So you want to be as transparent as you can, as often as you can. So to the extent that you can, build into your conversations, whether it's in your general donor communications that you send out to your annual donors, or in the cultivation and engagement strategies that you implement for your major donors, it is talking about what it is that you need as an organization to achieve the programmatic results that you want. And so it's okay to talk in context of the overhead, but I wouldn't. I would be as clear about what would happen if you didn't have the resources that you need.
Right.
So, for example, if you run, a meals delivery program, and you don't have, you've got, a lean staff because you feel like that's going to make you appear, more cost effective and efficient. Well, think about what are the ramifications for having that lean staff. You may not have the back office that you need to do your accounting and finances. You may not have the number of staff that you need to be able to grow and have a broader, meals delivery, sort of neighborhood reach. And then the strategic direction. Are there other things that you could be tacking on to those programs? Maybe some add-on support for the people who are, who are benefiting from that. Well, if you don't have that programmatic expertise on your staff, you're going to stay limited in the focus. So I think it's always talking about. I think in one of the slides we talked about, is it just enough or make do or do without, and always showing where is it that you want to go. What do you need to achieve that from where you are today? And what would happen if you didn't have all of those resources invested in your organization? Those are what I have always found to be important conversation topics to incorporate.
Yeah, and I would like to add on that, exactly, you should position this already in communications as part of your strategic plan. The second part goes to your question of, should you take advantage of a market opportunity? And my answer is yes, right? You've been fully transparent. You're positioned strategically because you've already been communicating how you use your funds to make an impact, right? Remember, focusing on impact here, and you're a worthwhile organization. If there's a market opportunity, you should take advantage of it. And again, I'll give you a good real-world example. One of my clients, as I said, it does participate in the veterans arena. Last week when I visited them, they are now going after increased giving with donors who are turned away from Wounded Warrior Project because they fill the same space. They fill the same need. Now, the important part for them is that a year ago they took a strategic initiative to become a 4-star rated charity with Charity Navigator, and they were successful at that. So now they have the perfect opportunity, since the infrastructure of that rating is already in place, to go after not only more donors but also major donors, because their strategic activity will support that market opportunity in this situation.
And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I'm gonna give you a kind of a harder question, Richard, if you'll indulge me. What would you say to someone who would consider that not a good thing to do, to sort of be opportunistic or take advantage of that situation? And I'm sure there are some people who think that. It's probably not a prevailing opinion, but what would you say to someone who says, that's maybe even unethical to do that? What's sort of your response to that opinion?
I don't think it's an ethics issue. I think we have to keep focused on the mission and the marketplace served. And if there is a need, which in this case there is, right? There is an individual who's in need, and we really need to support those organizations who are best positioned to serve that need. It isn't. Again, you can put it in the for-profit community. Those people who don't get it are the ones that aren't in business that much longer, right? The ones that serve the needs better are the ones that are more successful. It's the same thing in the nonprofit community.
And it isn't like
I agree.
And it isn't like you're now on the coattails of the bad press that a peer organization might be receiving, and saying, gosh, isn't it great? Isn't it, we're not like them.
I wouldn't do it that way.
You would not. Yeah, exactly. And you're not implying that at all. I think it's more of that what you just talked about. What makes you unique or best positioned to address the issue that you are focused on. It's that, what I always call either the competitive advantage or the comparative advantage, depending on, how you want to phrase it. But that's where you can perhaps be a little bit more proactive in your outreach to your donors and really focus and highlight the strategic vision and the planning and the operational results that you have been working hard to implement.
Well, I think we'll leave it at that. I feel like I could talk about this all day. Maybe you two feel the same way, but we are getting close to the 2 o'clock hour, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, especially if you haven't had lunch, which is important. So to those that ask questions, I know we didn't get to all of them. Barbara and Richard, would you be willing to take questions via email or Twitter or something like that?
Absolutely.
I thought you would say yes. Well, Barbara, Richard, this is awesome to have you. Really appreciate the discussion. Very interesting topic, obviously, and appreciate you taking an hour or so out of your day to join us.
Thank you. No, we were delighted to be here. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it was fun. And thanks to all of you who also took an hour out of your day. I know it's a busy time of year, and we definitely appreciate you joining us. We can keep the conversation going. We've got lots of resources on our website. We definitely encourage you to check out Barbara and Richard, follow them. We do these webinars every Thursday. We're going to take a couple weeks off here in March. We're back on March 17th. But I wanted to highlight one kind of cool presentation that we just put on the schedule. It's later on in April. We're going to be talking about face-to-face fundraising. We've got an expert in that, Darryl Upsall. He is a European fundraiser. And the face-to-face fundraising, the street fundraising is definitely more popular in Europe and Australia than it is in the United States. But we thought we would kind of tell you about that and maybe think of some ways that you can perhaps try that type of fundraising within your organization. So check that out. There's lots of other webinars listed on our webinar page. You'll find some more speakers and topics there. We would love to see you again sometime in the future. So I'll say a final goodbye and a special thanks to our presenters and to all of you who listened along. Look for an email from me later on this afternoon with the slides and the recording. And hopefully we talk to you again on another Bloomerang webinar. So have a great rest of your afternoon and a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.